Hi there. This is a video about writing cover letters, which goes hand in hand with preparing a resume. In this video, I'm going to talk about some strategies to carry your cover letter from what I call version 1.0 to 2.0. So if you've never written a cover letter before, here's a way to dive right in. And if you've got experience doing this, I hope some of these tips will be helpful for you as well. As a real quick introduction, I'll just emphasize, as the name suggests, a cover letter is a type of business letter. And since it's a business letter, you'll want to use business letter format, even if you're sending it electronically. Take a look back at week 2 if you'd like a little bit of a refresher about what business letter format looks like and all of the pieces to include, from your address and the recipient's address to the ways to format the paragraphs, and then conclude with a salutation like sincerely and your name. Maybe the easiest way to understand this version 2.0 of the cover letter that I'll describe is by understanding how it's different from the really kind of basic approach to cover letters that I think are very common. And I call this cover letter 1.0. So a cover letter 1.0 tends to be very self-centered and person-focused, and it's not to say that they don't work, because many people I know, and myself included, have been able to get positions using a cover letter or basic 1.0 letter. But here's the characteristics I see in these kinds of letters. Like I said, they're person-focused, so they're really just talking about the writer, what they are doing, what they have done. It centers only on their past experience. And if I were to sum it up in a sentence, it would say, "Hi, here's who I am. Let me tell you about me." And that's basically how these letters read. It's all about the person writing it. It can be a good introduction, but it does leave some to be desired, especially because typically when you're writing a cover letter, you're really trying to address how well you would fit the job and how well the job fits you. So when I talk about a cover letter 2.0, I'm really talking about formatting the letter so that it's position focused. It's going to still talk about you as the writer, but the focus shifts from you as a person to the position that you're trying to fill, the basically empty puzzle piece that you're trying to fit yourself into. And so here are some of these kinds of qualities of this type of cover letter. Cover letter 2.0 is going to focus on the position you're applying for and the job requirements and duties. So you're using this as an opportunity to really communicate to the hiring manager that you understand what the position is. Often people apply for jobs because it sounds good or they like how much it gets paid, but they don't really understand the job, and that only becomes evident when they are in an interview and they're being asked questions and just don't know what to say. So rather than getting to that point, use the cover letter to your advantage as a way to communicate to the hiring manager that you understand the position and that you're the person that's going to fill that position the best. So a strategy to do it is to mirror the language that you find in the job announcement. As a connection to the assignment, be sure that you have some job announcement, whether you're actually applying for it or not, because without one, it's going to be very difficult to write an effective cover letter. If you were to sum it up in a sentence, rather than saying, "Hi, here's who I am," like in version 1.0, the 2.0 letter will be saying, "Hi, here's who I am. Let me tell you what I think you're looking for in this position that you've announced and why I think I would be a good fit for the position." You'll notice it's a little bit more complex, but if you make the connection, you're going to help the employer make that connection as well. So to help communicate some of these tips, I've got a few basically fill-in-the-blank types of formulas you can consider using. But before you can get there, here's really where the homework is going to have to come in. First of all, read the job or position announcement really carefully and take note of any special keywords. So keywords are words that show up in repetition or vocabulary that seems kind of unique or specialized to the job. If this is your first time doing this, let me know. I'm more than happy to sit with you. We can take a look and determine what some of the keywords might be together. Once you have those words listed out, you can then use those words in your own letter. And anytime that you mention your own experience, the way you might do in a version 1.0 letter where you're talking about yourself, just be sure to connect it back to the position announcement. And one way to do that is to use their keywords. Something that's very important is if the job announcement has a list of required skills or experience for the position, make sure you address each one of those things in very clear terms. The reason for this is that most hiring authorities will use those stated requirements as the bare standard minimum, and that means that for anyone to move to the next stage to be considered, they need to meet them. And rather than hoping that the person reading your resume or letter is going to be able to guess or assume that you have it, it really helps if you can state in direct terms that you have met the requirement and how. So now that we've done that, here are some of these what I call formula sentences. Please, though, don't be constrained to look at them as just formulas. They're here for inspiration. So if you want to change the words around, I encourage you to do that. And the reason I'm using these variables is so that you can kind of fit whatever your experience might be into whatever kind of position you might be applying for. So use them as it is helpful to you, but don't feel like you have to use them word for word. So this first one is probably the most basic version, where you connect some experience or skill you have to something about the job or position you're applying for. And so in this case, and in all of these samples, X will be your experience and Y will be the part of the job announcement that you've just identified. So I apologize if you have not best of experience with mathematics. I'll say I don't think of myself as a math person, but I do think the XY variable here really is helpful. So in this case, you might just say very, very directly, my experience with this one thing is related to the job in these other ways. One of my jobs prior to becoming a professor, my very first job actually in high school, I was a lifeguard. And one of the things that I did in that job was I had to learn how to be very observant so that I could notice if somebody was struggling to swim in that case. So I might say in this case, my experience as a lifeguard relates to my experience as a professor by being able to observe what's happening and helping people if it looks like they're struggling. A different way to get at this, here's another different formula, is to lead by talking about the position announcement instead of talking about yourself. So the last one, I first talked about my experience as a lifeguard, and then I talked about the job. In this case, let's just try flipping it around. I can see from the job description for a professor that it requires the ability to be attentive and multitask and to be able to identify work priorities because there's a lot of different things going on. And I would go on to say, well, I'm prepared to do that because I previously had a position as a lifeguard where, in addition to keeping an eye on the water and making sure people were safe, I also had to take care of things like helping people at the check-in counter, we might say. So in this case, we're just foregrounding the job requirements and then after that talking about our experience. Same communication, different approach. Here's our third approach. This one works really well if you're applying for a job and you don't meet all of the requirements, which is perfectly fine to do. In fact, I encourage you to think about reaching for those jobs where you might be a good fit, but you don't have everything, and here's a way to do it. Even though I realize that this position requires these certain job requirements, and my experiences in these other ways are a little bit different or they're still developing, I'm a fast learner and I know that I could eventually do this because I've had this other experience. So to say something specific, again, maybe I'm applying for a job as a professor and I'm thinking about my previous experience as a lifeguard and maybe also my previous experience working in a restaurant as a server. So I could say something like, I know that the position of a professor requires the ability to teach several classes per semester. And maybe even though this would be my first time doing that, I know that I have really good experience with multitasking. As a server, I had to help lots of different people at different tables. And I also know that my experience as a lifeguard allowed me to identify priorities whenever there were lots of people in the water, trying to determine which areas might be highest risk. So I know that I could learn how to manage multiple classes per semester because I have that previous experience. And then in parentheses, it's even though I don't have the requirement met yet. I know that I can. Another kind of more sophisticated or advanced move here is addressing two parts of the job requirement with one piece of experience. So maybe in this example, I'll just read it. It says the position requires this first thing, which relates to my previous experience. But that previous experience actually also prepares me for this other requirement of the job. So I could say if being a professor requires the ability to multitask and the ability to be on call, maybe I could say something like, I realize that the job announcement for being a professor requires me to multitask, which I have experience doing in the past when I was a lifeguard because I had to keep an eye on lots of different people in the pool. And keeping an eye on all the different people in the pool also would help me be a professor, not just for the multitasking, but also to identify the priorities for what's most important. Again, use those examples as they're helpful to you or not, but I'm putting them here just because in my own experience, I've seen them work, and I've also seen them work better for students as they're developing and revising and improving their cover letters. So as I wrap this video up, I'll just say a couple of quick notes. First of all effective cover letters will be addressing the position that you're applying for and not just reflecting the skills and experience that you already have and you've already written about in your resume. To continue with that, the way to think of a cover letter is that it's there to really go beyond the resume, to support the resume, but also to tell the story that your resume just can't tell on its own. So it's not repetition and it's not just there as the name sounds to act as like a cover sheet. It really is there to do some important work for you as an applicant. I'll finish by saying I'm available for you if you'd like to meet for a consultation. Often working with these documents one-on-ones is most effective. Feel free to drop into office hours on Wednesday afternoons 2 to 4 or send me an email to make an appointment, as I'm happy to review your drafts and talk about any materials that you might be working with. Thanks.